Hey listeners of the ValueHunt podcast, today I'm here with Ali Gündüz, a good friend of mine and a specialist on Evolution AB. And I'm super excited because today we'll be discussing this company that I've actually covered a lot in my YouTube channel. So if you haven't seen this company before or don't know what Evolution is, please go check out Ali's work before and also some of my videos maybe, because this will be kind of a more like niche conversation, but we'll also cover some main topics. So if you're just a beginner, it's also good for you. So Ali, just say a couple of words before we start our interview.
Well, it's nice to see you again. As viewers may not know, David was my first guest in my office like earlier in the year, and I don't know, you're like a very interesting and great guy with despite maybe someone would expect of your youth, you're so like interested and driven into these topics, and from my own personal observations, you actually are like passionate about stuff that you're talking about. It's not all only a gimmick for the viewers. It's important to know. And I don't know, it's like there's an interesting guy. I'm looking forward to watching his future, how it unfolds.
Nice. Yeah, I was actually thinking, should I mention that I was the first guest? Because probably you told someone else it was the first guest, and I didn't.
Yeah. I tell that to everyone.
Okay, but it was actually pretty cool, and your office is amazing, and it was a really nice visit, and we were just talking about that before the interview. But probably the viewers are here for Evolution. I actually ask you, like, who is Ali, and like what's a bit of your background? How do you define yourself?
Sure. Well, simply put, I'm a full-time investor based in Berlin, Germany. But to give some context to my background and also how I ended up approaching investing, is I come from what you can say a family of entrepreneurs in Turkey. We used to have a family business that produced leathers for fashion brands like Chanel and some others, and it was a formative experience for me, not only during the time I've worked there full time, but throughout my life. When it's a family business that you're talking about, it's always a topic from your childhood on. It's always on the background, so to speak, even if you're not understanding everything that's being said. And I, for example, learned a lot from my father, who founded the businesses. He's like a crazy creative guy of different leather making styles, and even though he is such a creative guy, I would say like a genius in his field, he would always say that he is most proud of not of the office achievements that were the most creative, so to speak, but the achievements that he thinks that they used creativity to create like a commercial value from an intangible idea, basically, and which was an interesting thing, because what we're talking about is a more kind of a cyclical commodity business. And I think I observed from early on that even in such a field, and I think as a tangent, that I think investing in stocks itself is a kind of a commodity business, because basically anyone can do that. Anyone can buy stocks at a certain point at a certain price and sell them at a certain point at a certain price. So I am still in a commodity business, I feel, and that experience was just taught me that, even in a commodity business, you have to make sure that your efforts are not for effort's sake. You shouldn't work for just be working hard, but they should always be value add. And to cut it short, we sold the family business. I moved to Berlin, to Germany. And how I entered into the whole stock market investing thing was a result of my search for in my search of like starting maybe a business or investing in one, like a regular private business. And I came to the realization that, hey, there are like the best businesses in the world that are open for anyone to be actual owners in, actual partners in, without knowing anybody, without getting anyone's allowance, and or you can also divest them without asking anyone's permission as well. And I think because of my journey, I still see myself more as a business person, as a businessman, than like a purely financial investor of some numbers, of some papers on screen. But yeah, it's as a disclaimer for all of this, I'm still a beginner in my journey. It's like what I'm doing right now, I've been doing for the last maybe 5 years or a little more. And yeah, that's been my journey.
Yeah, it's pretty cool how you describe yourself and like all your background. I guess all of those like early experiences with the family business kind of shaped you into what you are today, and that's pretty interesting. And like moving on to more into like evolution and stuff. Like I'm curious to know how you found evolution and why. So probably explaining how you structure your portfolio and like your investment style that led you into finding it. It's a pretty interesting topic to talk about.
Sure. I mean, it's been a journey. It wasn't like a unitary journey in the sense that I'm not doing the same things that I'm doing at the beginning. I went through I think the stereotypical approaches of when you start investing. I read obviously Buffett and some other the classics. I mean, their quotes at least, and then some articles on them. And I did the basics, I guess you can say mistakes, but basic experiences of just investing in company names, so to speak. Oh, I like this company, or because like from superficial ideas. I tried my hand in deep value investing, but in a more immature sense. So, the company's earning this or has this kind of asset. I know it's selling for this price. It's a great value. This is what Buffett did in his early years. I should do that. I will do great. I think a lot of people went through this stuff when they were early in their journeys, in their investing journeys. And what I've come to for the last, I guess, 3-4 years, especially since the COVID, was that I decided, like, first of all, I think I had to take a look at the big picture, because I think I may be different from some of the viewers in the sense that I am not saving for my retirement. This is my full-time job, and this is how I earn my living. So I had to, again, look for, am I in another cyclical business like I was in before, and how can I make a value add in this? How can I guarantee, so to speak, my success? And then you take a look at the investing business in general from a private individual's perspective is, well, first of all, I have an obvious information disadvantage and even analysis disadvantage against the large-scale investors. I don't have the private data that they have access to. I don't have the brilliant minds they have access to. I don't have access to most of the expert networks. And further than that, when I look into my own personality and how, because when you're an individual investor, your personality determines a lot of the things that you can do and you cannot do. And when I look at my approach, or my personality, I see that I do not like taking final decisions in my life. And trading is taking final decisions one after another. Once you buy it, you buy it. Once you sell it, you sell it, and so on. And I don't like taking them. I don't like taking them often, so to speak. And when you combine it with that inherent disadvantage about the professional investors, the large scale investors, then how do I ensure that I can succeed? I think that how I've found the solution to it is to carve out my own niche. It's not an original. My conclusion from it was not original, but I think I have a good reason for why I do what I do, and I listed the cons of my chances of success. But how about the pros? Well, first of all, I don't have to report my performance. I don't have to judge my performance or have someone else judge my performance against the benchmark. So I don't have to outperform as long as I perform enough for my livelihood. And all of this comes from a inherent advantage that in these kinds of, I think, podcasts and such media, it's very commonly said, but I think it's an exception. And what I'm talking about is that I own my own capital, and which I think makes me the exception in the market. Maybe not in the numbers of investors, but I would guess that the majority, maybe 80-90% of the holdings of the trading that's done, or at least the active trading that's done on stock market, is done by people who don't own the capital that they play with, so to speak. So they have to report to someone who report to another one, and so on. And this creates it creates a structure where the short-term performance is usually much better, should be much better than someone who doesn't have those incentives. But it also creates a long-term, I think, advantage for people like me. And so what I came to is I want to have a portfolio of, well, maybe you can put it on the screen. That's my proud to own wall, so to speak. I have a few more holdings there, but those are I guess the biggest ones and the ones that I'm most sure of. Well, first of all, unlike the professional guys, I can invest in the benchmark that I'm compared against. It's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. And that old world index that you see above at the top is what I'm guessing that I will underperform against. And I think I don't have to explain the why index investing should outperform or should perform as well as can be expected from a risk reward scenario in the decades long time frame. And to be honest, if I was a completely rational, like a robot of a being, I would invest all of my capital into the index and be done with it. Why do I do that? Because I do not find it realistic. I cannot imagine me putting all of my capital into the index and just do nothing. That's just not realistic. What I would do in the end is the worst kind of trading, I think. So I would like to have as much as feasibly in index, but unfortunately, it's still like a small portion. I would, it's below 50%. It's more like 10% or a little more, maybe 20%. And the rest, I concentrate on companies where, first of all, companies that I can understand. And furthermore, companies where I can at least have even if ignorant view, at least have a view on their profitability in the next 10 or 20 years. That means that takes out almost 99% of the publicly listed stocks from my investing universe. But I don't have to have tens of thousands of stocks in my portfolio. I just need to find 10, 20, something in that order of magnitude. And that's how I came to a few businesses that you also see up on that, you have seen on that wall. And those are generally proven mode companies by their nature, because that's how I can predict that it will have a certain amount of profitability in year 2034, let's say. Because you cannot predict such a thing for most companies, at least I cannot. And they are usually with a great business model. So they are not only about, they will always be selling this amount and stuff like that, but they will probably be earning profits in a sustainable manner for the long term, which is also an exceptional thing, because proving a significant profit is against the nature of free markets, as you can imagine. So few companies can do that. And there's also another commonality in my portfolio, and also in the companies that I usually research, they're usually consumer facing. And that's simply because that's the only type of company where I can have an independent opinion on the company's performance, independently from the market's view and independently from the expert's view. And those two usually get to move in synchronized ways, I think. Not that experts have a potential. It's just that when the stock price is going up, it's usually the expert opinions that are positive that get more attention, and vice versa. So when you do not have an inherent or independent view of the company, you usually have to depend on what's in front of your eyes, and those are usually not helpful in the worst kind of moments. And I would say that evolution is kind of an exception in when you look at the wall, I think, in the sense that, at least in my view, I think its moat is not as proven as those other guys. It's not as proven as a 150-year-old company like Brown-Forman, or like makers of Jack Daniels, or Otis, the elevator escalator company, and so on. But I have also, it's been the company that I obsessed mostly over. And first of all, it has the promise of belonging to the group of other companies. I think it has a great business model. I'm sure we'll come to it. The bull thesis, so to speak. But it's also it's been a running experiment for me to explain, in the sense that it's the company that I research and track most diligently. I read every filing that they release. I used to, well, I don't do it this year. Maybe that's because they are working a lot more diligently, or maybe I'm not focusing that deeply in it anymore. But I used to find some mistakes in their disclosures and confirm them with the investor relations of the company. That's been like almost like a game of mine. Nothing like thesis changing or stuff like that. Most stuff's on the margin. And I'm trying to. It's first of all, the business, when you just look at the financials, it screams at you. It's like it's how can a business can be so profitable? That's how, actually, to answer your question, that's how I came into it. It was one of the tickers on Twitter, basically, that I looked at, but it was just so crazy, especially back when I first invested in it in 2020 and 2021. It's growing so fast, and the future that still has is that it's so profitable that how can it be real? First of all, is it a fraud? Second of all, is it a fad? Yeah. It's a very unlikely scenario. It is neither, but it turns to be, I think, neither. And it's an experiment. I would guess it's a journey for me to gain experience, because it has taught me a lot that I use in assessing in my other holdings. And it's just it's an obsession where I see how closely can I understand the company without being the majority shareholder or without being an industry insider. And I'm basically, this is how I hone and develop my talents, my skills in analyzing companies, I guess. And I also think it's a relatively simple company, relatively simple business model, where you can get instant feedback about its products and how consumers view it, and so on. It's a nascent, it's a beginning industry at its very early stages. Like if I happen to obsess over, I don't know, Otis, like the elevator company, or Philip Morris, it's like a cigarette maker, it would be hard for me to find original, like, new information or new analysis, because it's already covered so well, and it's an established sector with laws and regulations and
it's boring.
The insiders and institutions and everything. Exactly. And so this is a whole sector is still like getting formed. So it's been an interesting journey to go to Stockholm or go to sector conventions and conferences and talk to company, like not company, but the industry insiders and so on. So it's been an enjoyable journey. In the best case, I will get rich. In the worst case, I will get experience. That's how I'll approach it.
Wow, that's a good mindset. I guess we can think about that in most of our investments. But Evolution is definitely a special case, and so I think we should dive into it. Why don't you guys guide us through the bull thesis for Evolution, and like what's the like investment case in here? Because I'm sure you know a lot about it. So yeah.
Sure. I mean, interestingly, I think we will spend the least amount of time in the bull thesis, because it's a low IQ, obvious case, but it's also important to keep in mind as we will later on go through the risks and challenges and everything, that the things that you talk most about don't have to matter the most. And I think the bull thesis that I will quickly go over, even though it sounds low IQ and is low IQ and is a simple thing, is, I think, more powerful. I personally believe that it's more powerful than all of the other things that we will discuss later on. And to finally go over it, is my bull thesis, at least personally, is that, first of all, online gambling is still a small portion of gambling and like casino gambling or general gambling as a whole. And more than that, it's an activity that can generate its own audience. So it's not only about like a small portion getting a bigger portion, like a digitalization of the gambling, but it's such an accessible and entertaining and interactive thing that it can gain new end users for itself.
Yeah.
So I think online gambling as a concept has a runway that goes for decades and decades and decades. We're so far from its maturization, so far from its endpoint, so to speak. And inside of that wave, I think evolution is in the position of the main collector of profits of this sector, because you can do a lot of sales, but doesn't necessarily mean that you're able to collect profits. But evolution has carved out such a business model that it has all the profitable parts on it, and most of the costs, most of the headaches is given out to other parts of the ecosystem. So for all evolution has to do is basically keep alive, keep doing what it is doing, and still be the best supplier or best generator of content than it has been for the last 10 years. And I see it pretty unimaginable that it will not be a big commercial success. I'm not necessarily talking about stock success and what the valuation will be and so on, but if you owned 100% of it, if it was a private company and you owned it, you have to come to a very satisfying conclusion in 10 or 20 or 30 years is my guess. And to quickly delve into why it's such a interesting and attractive business model is, imagine that, I mean, when you're providing the service of an online casino, what are the biggest challenges? The biggest challenges are, in a regulated market, how do you check the IDs of the customer? Because, how do you let the minors not in, and how do you really, like, it's not a fraud, it's not a money launderer or stuff like that. How do you know that the person that you're interacting with that wants to open an account with you is the person who says he is? And when if the regulators come knocking on your door, you can prove that, oh, I have checked this person and it didn't have these unwanted features and stuff like that. Another part is, how do you collect payments? That's especially important in the unregulated side of it, where the governments are not your friends, so to speak, but they do not and they cannot, in most of the countries, most parts of the world, cannot completely regulate every piece of like small payments. But how do you reliably collect them? How do you store them? How do you protect them against hackers and then give payouts and stuff like that? That's a big headache. And the other big headache is, how do you let people know? Let's say I have aliscasino.com. I open it, I set up the whole thing, but nobody's coming. So the marketing is a big, big, big expense that will never stop, because the next .com, the davidscasino.com, is just one click away for everyone. So that's another big headache. Those three headaches, that the ID check, the payment handling, and the marketing, are none or almost none of Evolution's concern. That is given to its customer, to the operators. And Evolution just provides the games, keeps track of how much money has went through the system, has been bet, won, and lost, and stuff like that. And at the end of the month, it just sends an invoice to the operator, to its customer, and the sum on that piece of paper or that digital document is just a percent of its customers' revenue. So it's before all of the costs and all of the headaches. And if one of the headaches cause the operator to fail, doesn't matter, because the customer sees Evolution's games names, Evolution's own lobby of its own. In most of the operators, you can even like filter games by the suppliers and so on. So the amount of playing is not really changed by if one operator fails because of one of those headaches that I mentioned or not. So it has a constant stream. It earns a specific commission on those streams, and It doesn't handle all of the headaches, all of the costs. And also, I believe, though we will see it in a real recession, I guess, but I think online gambling is such an accessible and cheap form of entertainment that even in the bad economic times, I think it will remain accessible to the end player, because I mean you can adjust the amounts that you play with. They are usually, the minimum limits are, especially in game shows, are quite low. So I think it is, although I'm sure there is some cyclicality to it. When you have more money, obviously you will feel a little richer and play in bigger amounts and so on. But I think it's quite inflation resistant, simply because it's a commission, it's a percentage of the revenue that's circulating in the engine, so to speak. So if there's inflation and the money is less valuable, then the people would bet a little more because they want to bet a similar value. That doesn't change your metric. It's like Visa or MasterCard. You know, the inflation is not really a concern for you. And also on the cyclicality of the consumer spending, I would guess there is some, but it's not huge, and most importantly, it is not permanent. So in the long term, you know, it equals out anyway. So this is my big bull thesis. I think this is, you know, optimistic. Doesn't sound very sophisticated, but I think it is. This idea is more powerful than all of the challenges we will go through. Though the challenges are, you know, should be taken seriously as well.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure like evolution is a case where people focus more and more on the risks because it looks so attractive. Like just look at the ROE or the margins. Like it's crazy. It's not, there's not any other business in the world that can generate as much money as a percentage, obviously. But like, yeah, I guess the bull thesis can't be ignored, and it's really an interesting company. They really do unique things, and people really like their products. So I'm pretty sure we'll also dive into more of the like expert insights further in the interview. But now let's talk about the topics that everyone on Twitter wants to know. I'm actually really surprised by all the people that ask you questions and how many questions you got on your Twitter post. But yeah, people were mainly concerned about like the regulatory risks, the supply bottleneck in Georgia because of the strikes and stuff, and also the US profitability. So I'll let you like tackle some of those risks before we dive into the other topics that are, let's say, more recent.
Sure. I mean, well, first of all, I personally have always also spent most of my time in determining the risks. Back in like 3 or 4 years ago, back when the PEs were in the 50s and 60s, it was more of a novel thing. What I was doing is like concentrating on risk, but how I basically see the investment case of evolution is that the upside is so unlimited and so vast. I don't think it makes a lot of sense to really try to calculate what the upside is, because I mean you will not be able to estimate it anyway. So I think the upside is just there for the taking. I don't have to really care too much about upside. So how I spend my time, most of my time, is just looking at the risks and trying to understand their magnitudes. There was always risks. There will always be risks. So the question is not are there risks or not, or are there even valid risks or not, but it's just that does it cancel out, or are their magnitude big enough to cancel out the opportunity? You know, that's the upside.
Yeah.
So yeah, the biggest risk that's the most like actively discussed these days is the regulatory, and everyone has their own I think approach to it. I don't think there's a canonical way to approach this, because simply it's such a new field. I kind of liken it to Uber's and Airbnb's early days, where basically in their early days there was no regulations for it, and in most of the jurisdictions, most of the markets they opened to, they were basically pirate taxi like provider and like unlicensed hospitality providers, or at least the facilitators of such an industry. But in time, obviously, some regulations come to that. But I think online gambling is still in those early stage for most people, for most of the market, because even in regulated markets, there are a lot of unregulated or extra regulated activities in regulated markets as well. And I try to simplify these things because when you think about it, evolution has probably customers in almost every country on earth. And there are good and negative news coming out of everywhere. And if you read too much into those things, I try to read them, but when you put too much weight in every single police action or enforcement action or regulator decision or court decision, then you would be overwhelmed. It's if you want to approach it like that, it's better to keep away from evolution because there is so the big amount of news is just overwhelming. So how I approach is I try to simplify these things as much as possible and try to find the deciding factor. And my view on it is there are tens or maybe hundreds of regulators in the world. Well, though there are a few cases that there are a few pieces of analysis that we can take out from this. But first of all, no regulator in the world controls a large amount of Evolution's revenue. I would guess, though, it's like completely instinctual, so I don't have hard data for it, but I don't think any regulator in the world controls maybe more than 5%, probably much less than 5% of Evolution's revenue, simply because in Asia, there is no regulator of online casinos specifically, and in other parts of the world, the markets that are most on the open, like in Europe and in the US, there is no US gambling authority. There is no European gambling authority, or maybe if there is, it's not the deciding authority there. So you have countries and states regulators, and so from those tens or hundreds of regulators, you have to pick the ones that can really make a difference. And from there, I come to another assumption that I think that the regulators outside of Europe and US do not really matter too much because they cannot control it to a large extent, especially the payment side of it. That's the big enabler, so to speak. It's impossible to control small payments all over the world especially it's a popular activity among users. So it's a little like, I found a little like to the tobacco situation where, you as a country, especially outside of US and Europe, you can try to ban these things, but all you do is you forgo tax revenue and you almost subsidize criminal groups because there is the demand for it is not very elastic. It is there. And so when you come to Europe, they seem to be exclusively European regulators, as far as I can understand. They're only interested in their own jurisdictions, and they try to control their own jurisdictions, which is a hard thing anyway because of the whole payment side of it and how it's impossible to really understand what the market is doing, especially the black side of it, the unofficial side of it. So they do not really care, or they do not really investigate companies on their activities from outside of their jurisdictions. So that just leaves us US. Again, US doesn't have a federal regulator here. Every state has its own regulator, the ones at least that have legalized gambling. And there, yes, some states say, you have to follow our rules in our jurisdictions, but more than that, we don't want any legitimate black market operators or suppliers in our jurisdictions, and you shouldn't be like that. But there, the golden standard was always like New Jersey, and they have their official stance is that it's okay if you're supplying to gray market as long as you're not supplying to the black market. It's okay, though. Even there, it's like these things of black, gray, and white are not really very definite. It's like they are very subjective, like extremely subjective. There was a video of like an New Jersey regulator who says that like we didn't know, or we didn't determine if China had legalized or illegal gambling or not. It's like it's a very obvious fact that it's completely legal. It's like they're cracking down on a lot, but from their point of view, they cannot police the whole world, and these stuff actually are not actually clean. Even though I say obvious, in most countries it is not that obvious, because let's say gambling is illegal in, let's say, Saudi Arabia, but how about a Saudi Arabian citizen goes to US, goes to Las Vegas casino, puts like $100 on a blackjack. Did he commit a crime? And those kinds of things. With internet, it's even harder, because then where you are and where you do business in are like, again, like complicated a lot. So their position is, from what we can understand, is that we don't want politically liable, like big PR cases of like illegal activity in our suppliers. So here, the risk, from my understanding, is the lobbying, actually. So as they are, the regulators are okay. Evolution is the cleanest and most open guy supplier that's available, and they're creating jobs, but there are some losers from the whole digitalization of gambling, so to speak. One is the land-based casino chains who are not gaining much from the online betting and gambling market. Who are those guys? The regional casinos. Think about, like, not Las Vegas casino, but casino in some other parts of the US. That's, you would go there only to gamble, basically, or maybe stay at the hotel if you're gambling there. But they're not an attraction where you would cross state lines or cross, even like come internationally to attend there. So the smaller casinos, they're not getting anything from they're not earning any profits from them. Mm-hmm. The tribal casinos are also similar to regional casinos. The service workers who work there, because maybe for croupiers, it's not a huge deal. They can go to, if the online gambling comes, they can still work as a croupier for an online casino. But how about the waiters? How about the cleaners? And so on. And so the workers' unions there are one of the lobbyists, possible lobbyists at least, that could be. And the third category of losers are the big Las Vegas, the big casino chains who have decided not to go into this, or like ideologically they never liked it. And the main example there would be Las Vegas Sands, from their founder on. They never liked the concept of online gambling a lot, and they are not very big. There was some news that they would enter as a competitor to Evolution as a live casino supplier some years ago, but nothing came out of it. I think at this point they're a little too late anyway. So if you're a loser like that, or if you're a loser like Light and Wonder, they used to be Scientific Gaming, where their main business are producing casino cabinets for the land-based casinos. For those guys, for a lot of those guys, there's this transformation is not a good thing. So there are those established interests in the US that could lobby the regulators to care more about Evolution's unregulated activities in the world. So it's not impossible. It's not an invalid risk. I think there is this risk. But on the other hand, this was more of a risk, I think, 2 years ago, when Evolution wasn't this big in the US. Right now, Evolution, even though online gambling is not not legalized in most states, in just 4 states, Evolution already has 4,000 employees, more or less. Mm-hmm. And for a regulator, it's very important where the employment comes and so on. So at this point, from my understanding, is Evolution is already quite big in the states that has legalized gambling. And so the risk maybe could be from the Nevada, from Las Vegas, where the big guys are out there, but Evolution is not yet there, and stuff like that. But as time goes on, it gets a little more likely for the regulator to get swayed by the legacy players, so to speak. But it's a valid risk. But it's also important to there was a big assumption where basically conclude that U.S. state regulators are the only actors that could permanently damage Evolution. I think so, but I also don't have hard data, and this assumption could also be wrong. But yeah, regulatory risk is there, but I think it's so diversified, and the parts that really matter, Evolution is already so strong and so entrenched. I think opportunity still outsizes the risk in this regard.
Yeah, for sure. And like, I remember this story very vividly when I was doing my first research on evolution, which was like this. I think it was New York and New Jersey. So, if I'm not mistaken, New Jersey had legalized gambling, and New York was illegal. And
Right.
so people would commute from New York to New Jersey to actually gamble on like online
Right.
actually, and yeah, then New York realized that it was losing like tax money, and so it's like those kind of things that you can't really ban because people will do it anyways. They will find ways to do it, and so I guess the trend and the important thing to analyze in this specific risk, which is the regulation, is the trend positive for evolution or negative? And I feel like it's positive. Obviously, this is only my opinion. Everyone has to find out for themselves. But yeah, if you look just at the Philippines, for example, a user on Twitter asked you about the Philippines and like the Asian market. So yeah, probably we could also talk about that, because that's a good example of how regulation is actually, let's say, trending towards a regulation and not like banning. So yeah, why don't you talk about the Philippines and like the Asian market as a whole?
Sure. I mean, it's a whole different area where I think up is down and down is up, in the sense that
Mhm.
as an evolution shareholder, I would hope that regulation comes to Asia very slowly,
Yeah.
because it's the simple story about evolution is, as online gambling gets legalized and regulated, we are going to the promised land, so to speak. But it doesn't really necessarily go in that way unless it's handled well. US more or less handles well, but for example, Europe there are a lot of, not everywhere. For example, from what I understand, Portugal is quite like progressive in that sense, but there are markets like Germany or Netherlands or UK in some sense, where regulations have come, but they have restricted it in such ways, or put such funny laws, like rules and limits into it, that people are basically directed to offshore sites. So it's like it has turned a gray market into a black market by bad regulations, so to speak. Because again, the demand is there, and when you make the legal gambling not fun, and also legal gambling not marketable, or not marketed to consumers, then from consumers' point of view, they don't know there's legal and illegal. Oh, this is regulated in this country and this is regulated in this country and stuff like that. They just go see an ad or see like an affiliate link for it and go to a casino and gamble. So when you put the regulations in an unrealistic way, then you can channel it more from out of the regulations.
Yeah.
And so I think and Asia is a big market. I just wanted to put that warning there, in the sense that not all regulation is good, but obviously most regulations are better. And in the long term, even bad regulations are good, because they usually, once you start that ball rolling, probably Germany will reform its the non-practical sides of it at some point in time. It cannot go like this for decades and decades. So even if you take a long enough time frame, even a bad regulation is good. And Asia. So Asia is the biggest gambling market in general, land-based plus online. It is the biggest online gambling market probably. And it is even possible that its evolution is just a small part of live casino in Asia. That's one of the problems. Maybe we'll take we'll discuss in a later part of the risks, but that's one problem. There, especially in Asia, it is the TAM, so to speak. The market is pretty much unknowable by anyone. I'm not talking about outsiders, but I would guess even Evolution CEO does not know how big of a market it is, because it's a bunch of like private companies connected to other private companies to collect payments through some unofficial means, or sometimes official means, and stuff like that. So just from anecdotally, we can guess that we can surmise it's the biggest market. There may be some cultural reason for it, but there's a bigger per capita interest for it, so to speak, even though spending power may not be there. And there, the biggest market is also the most unregulated market. And yes, Philippines have been the pioneers in this area. It's not not necessarily always in a good sense. They had these things called POGOs, where they gave licenses to some offshore suppliers. But what happened was tens of thousands of a bunch of Chinese came in, and because in China payments are so restricted, you basically have to be some kind of a hard criminal organization to be able to handle payments in China. And so the people they sent to Philippines to set up studios and operators and everything, the whole infrastructure was not really made to operate within the laws. And just this year, some of the things came out that these guys were not only in gambling but in all different kinds of criminality. Because once you if you let the actual criminals license to a certain business, they will not say, "Oh, we have a license now, so let's keep it legal and clean in this area." But they will just continue doing what they're doing anyway, just in a freer environment. And exactly. So they had this kind of I would say unsuccessful experiment, but they're experimenting. That's a big thing because there's a big demand here, and the laws are just not enough to handle the situation. And yes, I think it's been a year that they have also started legalized domestic online gambling. Evolution has been the first live casino supplier that's been licensed and allowed by the state. And now in the last earnings call, Evolution CEO said, "Oh, we have to also open a studio there, simply because if you want to, serve the market, we have to have some operations there." From what I understand, they didn't provide a lot of details to which extent they can stream from outside and to which extent they have to be inside the country. But I think it will be, even though it has taken a lot of time for the first domino to fall, so to speak. Once you have Philippines there, that's earning serious tax income, then what's stopping the next country over and the next country over and the next country over? Because in a completely unregulated environment, when you have one country that's regulated, that's when the others are collecting zero revenue and only having the policing headaches over it, you see your neighbor actually earning revenue on it, tax revenue on it. I think it changes the psychology. It makes it a lot more feasible for local politicians in other parts of the region to say, "Oh, look at what Philippines is doing. Maybe we should do that too." And I also think Philippines could be a very interesting studio supply as well. Not just for Philippines, from everywhere. It could be maybe it's a bad example, but it could be the next Georgia, in the speak that it can cost a big amount of capacity there, because it's already famous for outsourced service jobs, and it has very good English proficiency in the region, and a big population. It's I forgot the numbers. It's many times over than the combined populations of where most of Evolution studios are outside of North America. And it brings that idea as well. And when you think about it, obviously right now I'm speculating, but imagine that Evolution is not only earning tax revenue, but also creating jobs there. Mm-hmm. Then that makes it even more attractive for the other regions, because the other countries would say, why wouldn't we create also jobs for our own people? And Evolution's jobs are usually quite, the employment of Evolution is quite effective in its jurisdictions, simply because the people that it employs are the most interesting from the point of government to employ, because they're not. I mean, they employ obviously a lot of engineers and software engineers and stuff like that. But the most interesting part is the presenters, where that's how you start your career basically when you're a university student or new graduate, and those are the people who are the hardest to find employment for from the point of view of the government. You don't want them. Unemployed and active on the streets. You want them working. So it's also in lobbying, or from the point of the regulators and governments, Evolution can create a very valuable employment opportunity beyond even the headcount that it employs.
Yeah, for sure. It's like a bit of like McDonald's, I guess. So like a lot of people get their first jobs at Evolution, and maybe even part-time jobs. I know in Spain a lot of Evolution dealers actually study. Yeah, it's quite interesting, and I guess one of the other main topics that has been going on Twitter and for all the Evolution shareholders is like the Georgia strikes. And since we already talked a little bit about Georgia and like how Philippines can actually replace them,
Right.
so like why don't you guide us through what happened in Georgia and with Evolution's workforce?
Well, it's a very like a simple case of actually over dependence in a single jurisdiction, basically. But what happened is it's the studio's founding goes a little before the COVID, but in simplistic terms, with COVID came a sudden surge in demand, and it also came at a time when Evolution couldn't fill even its own studios with full people because of the health reasons, and Evolution Georgia gave Evolution an environment where they could grow very rapidly, and it came to a point where I personally estimate that maybe last year half of Evolution's profits were generated by the studio in Georgia, obviously with IP that's developed across Europe, but it's basically their legacy main hubs in Malta and Latvia are even in smaller countries with higher wages, and Georgia was a place where they had already some roots in by the time of COVID, and they could find cheap and big numbers of presenters. Again, presenting job are not supposed to be permanent employment, but it's a thing that you do during or right after university. You work there a few years and you build your CV and you upgrade to other jobs. Sometimes even inside Evolution, you upgrade to other jobs. And by actually last year, one of the issues was Evolution was not hiring enough in Georgia. It was actually one of the questions I asked the CEO back in April during the annual general meeting in Stockholm. Was why aren't you hiring even more in Georgia? And they actually ended up, we later learned that they were actually hiring a lot this year until the strike in the first half of the year as well. And then the strike happened. To quickly comment on the strike, how I view it. Well, first of all, I personally believe that workers can fight for their rights and negotiate and everything. And I think that's an important thing. That's also, as a Swedish company, I think it's also not something very alien for the manager's culture as well. But when you read the interviews with the strikers and the general pro-strike articles and stuff like that about the event, that you see as well, there are two parts of the demands there, of complaints of employees there. One is some operational issues, and on that I think they're very completely right. I think Evolution grew a little too quickly and they didn't handle everything perfectly, and they should have improved it, and they have improved in many of them, and to others I think I would hope they would improve. These are the things like the middle managers not being as professional in their private communications as they should be, and there are some infestation problems with some insects and stuff like that, and not having enough access to immediate medical services and stuff like that. Were like operational issues that that should be there, and I would expect Evolution to at least provide them in a timely time frame. It's but these are also not very huge issues. They are very solvable from Evolution's point of view. But the big sticking point was that the wages should be higher. The guys in Canada are earning 5 times our wages, and we should be earning that too. But when you look at their literature and their interviews, they admit that actually Evolution provides a very competitive market in Georgia. What they're saying is we have to begin somewhere. We have to rise the wage standards of our country. Mm-hmm. Now I can sympathize with that. What I'm reading, especially after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Also, if Russians came to Georgia, the rents have increased a lot. Life is a lot more expensive. So I sympathize with that, but that still brings us to think that evolution actually provides quite a competitive wage. We can also understand a sign of it from we can understand it is like this from the information that most of the workers have never participated in the strike. And so this is more of a political issue for the labor organizers, basically for the labor unions. And so the labor situation in Georgia I think is a little more about internal politics of there, but the fact remains that evolution had too much dependence on one country alone, and now they're doing what they should be doing. They're trying to diversify and hire in other places. The numbers that I saw in the last quarterly shows that they're actually doing that. They're hiring a lot in other places, even outside of North America. But in the short term, I think they will have some challenges in finding enough workforce in Europe, in Eastern Europe, or in Southern Europe. So I will be watching that. But the COVID shock, where the demand had suddenly surged, but they actually let go a lot of the presenters because of COVID, has shown us that they can handle this. Give them a few quarters, and they will handle the supply situation. I think there is if evolution cannot do it, no one can. So I think they will. It will take some time, but they will find new supply in other places in Europe. And in the long term, my hope is what they can do with the supply in Philippines and in Latin America, and how that can supply other markets as well.
Nice. Okay, so just to wrap the risks up, because I think we've covered it extensively. Like, why don't you talk about the competition risks, like what's the competition landscape for evolution, and like Pragmatic play, and maybe some of the other suppliers.
Sure.
Yeah, that would be pretty interesting.
Sure. I mean, I think it's quite telling that we came so late in the risks of to discuss the competition, because just a few years ago, competition was actually the top risk. Everyone was talking about, evolution has grown so much and is making so much money, but it's a free market. Other people, it's easy to put a webcam in front of a croupier and just do this. And the Pragmatic has come up also with game shows, and Playtech has also, and stuff like that. I think it is quite telling that it is not talked about and thought about as much today. And I think it's a part of the trend where evolution has shown that its expertise in especially in game shows, but also in game showification, so to speak, of regular table games. But let's go over the competition situation quickly. I think evolution themselves admit that it's a low barrier to entry market. So you can realistically, when I'm thinking about these things, if David gave me, let's say, 50 million euros, would I be able to compete against evolution? In some sense, I could, but if David gave me $500 million, could I compete, and in which sense, and so on? And I think there are three main competition vectors against evolution currently. One is the guys mainly like Playtech, but like right now the Light and Wonder, they bought a supplier called Authentic. Those two companies but there may be more. They're excluding their reach and their sales to regulated markets. Mm-hmm. So their whole tactic is, we cannot compete against evolution with the quality of games and the supply and our scale. But what we can do is, let's keep ourselves to regulated markets, and plus one thing, let's do some exclusivity deals, which they do. Playtech, for example, earns a lot of its growth from its exclusive deal in Mexico, for example. And this is one vector. If I had to compete against evolution, I could go this route, keep it completely regulated and completely or mostly exclusive. And when you have in a regulated market where you have only one supplier, like state sanctioned suppliers, and they have to work with you for X number of years, for 10 years, let's say. I think it's also a case in Netherlands as well, in the live casino. Then you can compete in some ways against evolution, right? That's one way to. If you gave me the funds against evolution, I could imagine doing that. Another way would be to attack from the below, so to speak, which is just offer classic table games. Not go for the big game shows, because there we cannot really, if we would just mess it up, probably it's quite harder. But let's put some cameras in front of some roulette tables and go to operators and say, oh, is Evolution offering you 10% take rate? I will offer you just 5%. It's a lot cheaper, and you can attack it that way, because it's roulette. How much can you improve the classic game or the blackjack or stuff like that? So that's another way. That's another attack vector, and there are a lot of guys there. There are Bet Construct, there's On Air, there's Stake Logic, there are hundreds of more where you can compete with 10 tables, probably not profitably, or you can compete with hundreds and 200s and 500 and 600 and 1,000 tables. But that's another way. Besides these two attack vectors, besides these two competition groups, there is just one single company that's a category on its own, and it's the Pragmatic. It's hard to get information on them. Obviously, they're a private company, and because of reasons that I will go into, they also don't give out, I think, a lot of information because they don't want to be on spotlight. But first of all, whatever Evolution is for live casino, Pragmatic is for RNG, for slot games. They create the most popular games. From what I understand, like Evolution has the Crazy Time, that's the big brand in live casino. I think Pragmatic's Candy something, not Candy Crush, obviously. But sorry, I forgot it for a second. But it is that game for slots, but for many others as well. And besides the slots power, which is a bigger market than live casino and a cheaper market, and also more commodity and more competitive market as well. They are also in live casino as well. They have basic games. They have some game shows that are obvious, a little cheaper made copies of Evolution's games. And they are also a little loose with marketing as well, from what I understand, from the anecdotal things I heard from insiders or in general players, is that they do. Now, first of all, they spend a big budget on consumer and player marketing with all kinds of promotions. But Evolution has just started this type of marketing, so maybe they have learned something from them. Plus, they are purported to have some, let's call shady or questionable relationship with some streamers, where people at least argue that they let them some streamer play with paper money, and it's a big thing. If you bet just $1 million, and you can even if you lose or win, it's a big entertainment, right, for the watchers. And
exactly.
Or even if not that kind of shades, like it's just, they are also not to just put throw mud on the competitors. So they seem to be a lot more successful in end customer, the player marketing. They're a lot more active, and that's a category on its own. But I do not see from either of these three a way that destroys Evolution's scale and IP moat. I mean, what can happen is, yes, the regulated market, the exclusivity deals will be there, but it's not really a huge growth market, and they end at some point, and that remains an upside for Evolution when the date comes. And on the smaller guys, they may turn out to be sustainable businesses, and maybe Evolution will more be on the upper, like more customized table games and game shows. But that's a big market enough, I think, for Evolution to succeed. So I don't see competition as an existential threat, at least at this moment. But which connects with another risk that I can say, that's it's called, I think, the bus factor, or sorry, I again forgot the term for it. But the simple version of it is, what happens if Todd Haushalter leaves the company tomorrow? What if they have a news release, and they say the chief product officer leaves? What happens then? Or the more generalized version of it is, Evolution was just one of the small suppliers a few years ago. If you go 10 years ago, and they started with everyone else. In fact, Playtech was even before them in live casino, I think, and they came to this. So it wasn't an inherited success. They came to this with their hard work, but that also creates the execution risks. It means that the personnel and management was great in those last 10 years, let's say. But what about the next 10 years if the management is not there anymore, and stuff like that? That's a risk. But from my interactions and from what I see, there's a culture that's there. I mean, the culture is an intangible thing. It's a risk for any country, for any company. So there is no guarantee against this. There can be a culture rot, stuff like that in decades and stuff like that. So that's why you have to keep on top of it. But I don't think it's an immediate risk. The simple question again, if we come back to it, what if Todd, if there's a news release, because that's what we will learn. We will not learn why Todd is leaving probably. But if there's a news release tomorrow that says Todd Haushalter is leaving the company for personal reasons or stuff like that, what will you do? Will you sell the company or not? And that's, I think, it's like a Buffett question with the Berkshire. You have to have a view on this, yeah. I think, if you think that you're a long-term owner of the company. I think, and from my observations, I think the culture is there strong enough that I personally don't think that I would sell that day. But that's, again, like a question that you should have on your mind. And to wrap up the risks, I can also say that I think I realized this a lot more this year, but I think that inherently, because evolution operates in such an opaque market, I mean, the regulated side of it is more known to a certain extent. For example, in the US, the states even release monthly numbers of how much was, what the volume was in the online casino space and stuff like that. But especially in the unregulated side, especially in Asia, we do not know how big the market is. That also means that we do not know Evolution's market share in live casino. And this creates a challenge for the shareholder, and I think this challenge will remain here, is that it's impossible to know if Evolution is losing market share in its main operations to other people. I mean, we will probably understand it after it becomes obvious, like, a few years and stuff like that, but it will always be a question, especially, for example, this year when the growth has slowed down a lot. Was it because just iGaming has slowed down in those markets, or did maybe someone else won their customers over? So there's this opaqueness in the market where we will probably never know, at least for the coming future, never really know Evolution's market share from quarter to quarter, even from year to year. And that means that the shareholder has to be somewhat comfortable with the idea that we will not know if any slowness in growth, in Evolution's growth, comes from the market's slowness or Evolution just losing market share to competition. And it's especially, it comes to the foreground in years like this where the growth is a little slower. But I think actually this was always here. It was just hidden by the amazing growth rates of previous years. And so this is one of the other things that makes investing in Evolution so interesting, but also challenging at the same time. But I think these are the main risks that like a shareholder or someone who's interested in being a shareholder in Evolution should keep in mind. And I think every one of them are valid risks. These are not risks that will, with hard work and enough time, that will just go away. One has to determine like a magnitude, assign some magnitude to these risks and compare it to the opportunity. And that's the only way to decide on whether investing in it makes sense for you or not.
Yeah, I like that risk-reward mindset, and I think it's really powerful in investing. Since we've covered a lot, I guess we'll break this interview into parts so the viewers don't get overwhelmed with so much information. But I really love how excited we both are about Evolution and how long we can talk about all these little details. But I also feel that adds a lot of value to the shareholders. So if you want to kind of see the next part of the interview, which is more about the growth and the personal experience that Ali had with meeting the CEO and Todd.
The more fun part.
The more fun part. You can skip to part 2. I mean, not skip it, still do your homework. But you can now go into part 2. And
we ate our vegetables, now we can eat the candy.
Exactly. So we'll stop this interview right now and you can watch part 2.